Good morning, or good morning, yeah. Right. Yeah, right here. Would you change the script? Good evening and welcome to the special meeting of the Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District Feasibility Study. I have a roll call vote, or roll call, please.
Certainly. Councilman Lloyd Johnson.
Here.
Councilmember James Toma.
Here.
Councilman Tony Wu. Mayor Pro Tem Spence.
Here.
And Mayor Warshaw.
Here. And will you be giving the introduction?
I can do so, yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of City Council. This evening, we have a presentation from city staff as well as Covina companies regarding enhanced infrastructure financing districts. This has been a City Council goal and objective for the last couple of years to look into other financing mechanisms for city projects of infrastructure. What we'd like to do is I'm going to turn over to Ms. Morales, who's going to give a little introduction of why we're here this evening, and then turn over to Brian Moncrief, who's with the Covina companies, to talk about what EIFDs are, the benefits of those, and the areas that we had talked about in the past with the City Council, focusing on two distinct areas in our community, being one, the BKK area, as well as the downtown corridor that was identified in the general plan. So with that, let me turn over to Ms. Morales to give a brief introduction.
I know your introduction was very good. Good evening, Mayor and Council members. Tonight before you is the analysis that Covina Companies has done in regards to the possibility or feasibility of establishing two EIFDs, one in the downtown district, as Chris mentioned, one in the at the BKK site. So on the April 19th, 2016 council meeting, you approved the contract with Cosmont, and tonight before you is the feasibility study that they conducted. So without further ado, I'll transfer it over to Brian Moncrief of Cosmont Companies to provide a summary of the analysis.
Mr. Mayor, just for the benefit of those who are here in our audience, what we'll plan on doing is do a presentation from the consultant as far as the EIFDs, and they'll open up to kind of an informal dialogue with the public since there's not a large attendance. But we do ask that they come to the podium if they have any questions so the folks out at home can hear the questions as well.
There we go. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor, members of the Council. Brian Moncrief, Senior Vice President with Cosmont Companies this evening, here to give you a presentation on EIFDs and our initial analysis based on the two areas that were identified preliminarily by the City staff and Council. So in terms of a quick executive summary on our discussion this evening, Cosmont, as you remember, was retained to look at the financial and economic feasibility of these two EIFD areas to support infrastructure improvements in order to determine whether or not to proceed with the formation and actual implementation of these two areas and establishing an enhanced infrastructure financing district for both areas. Key findings, just in terms of what we've looked at thus far, EIFD, as we discussed the last time we were meeting with the council, really has the capacity to serve as a pretty major financing vehicle for key infrastructure, and not only for the northern area of the city, but the downtown as well, the two areas that we've identified. West Covina is likely with these EIFDs to benefit mostly from joint jurisdictional or multi-jurisdictional agreements with various taxing entities to help leverage not only the city's portion of property tax revenue, but the county and other special districts as well to help fund these infrastructure improvements. And just at a very high level, the next steps really include outreach to the potential public and private sector stakeholders if, for any reason, the city chooses to move forward and start negotiating with various taxing entities to talk about what the EIFD is and how each of those various entities could benefit. So just a quick background on the project. The existing conditions portion, 980 acres with both of these areas, 320 of which is in the downtown EIFD area, and 660, which includes the BKK landfill, as well as some adjacent property. So some of the various, what we'll go through are some of the various planned and proposed economic development projects that exist within the city, as well as some of the revenue-generating uses that we've talked about and the revenues that actually could be generated as a result of establishing this district. Likely challenges as part of formation really relate back to existing infrastructure, looking at, the fact that there are fewer economic development tools in the state today to help finance infrastructure and incentivize private development to increase property tax revenues. EIFDs are just one of many, but could be a very useful tool if the ability to work with other taxing entities like the county and others comes to fruition. Cooperation is really key in regional infrastructure and projects. So in terms of the opportunity, the state is really, as I mentioned, prioritized installation of local and regional infrastructure to promote sustainability, energy and resource efficiency, and greenhouse gas reduction. The goal with the EIFD is not only to capture property tax revenues that are generated from increased development, but also to leverage that revenue in order to go after grant funding opportunities that achieves the state's goals. Cities like West Covina can really also take advantage of the fact that they have high-quality transit areas, which could be used to leverage when you go after these grant funds. The goal, of course, is to leverage your property tax revenue in order to get grant funding to match the funding that the city is already attempting to contribute as part of the district. So here's a quick outline of the presentation. Going forward, we're really going to talk about EIFD fundamentals, what they are, what boundary considerations that the city staff went through to determine BKK and downtown as potential areas to pursue, and then funding and financing. What do the revenues look like in terms of what's generated, and how could that be used to satisfy priority transit and infrastructure projects? And then implementation and next steps, what we see as those, and the schedule for that. So EIFDs, as I mentioned, are really kind of new districts that the state has granted authority for cities and former redevelopment agencies to use in order to induce private investment and provide infrastructure projects. The lifespan of the district is 45 years. There's no school tax increment allowed, so property tax revenues that are generated and given to schools are not a part of the Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District. And if the city were to go out for a bond, 55% landowner or registered voter election is needed for the tax increment bonds that are proposed. And also important to note that the district itself does not increase property taxes. So as I mentioned, here are some of the projects that an EIFD can fund, anything from industrial structures to wastewater, groundwater, transit-oriented development, brownfield remediation, and other public uses like parks and open space, civic infrastructure, as well as child care facilities. These are just some of the ones that are mentioned. The statute is less specific, but also mentions that projects of community-wide significance could also be funded through the Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District. Some of the key terms important to keep in mind of, the EIFD is basically a governmental entity established by a city or county that really carries out the plan to construct and improve or rehab the infrastructure within the defined areas that are selected. The Public Financing Authority is the legislative body that really kind of governs the EIFD. It's made up of not only members of the city, but any other members of any other special tax district that agree to become a part of the EIFD itself. And then at least 2 members of the public are also part of this Public Financing Authority. And then once your PFA is formed, an infrastructure financing plan is put together, and really what that does is that outlines the types of projects, infrastructure projects that are planned to be financed, how much is needed to finance those projects, and then what are the goals ultimately of your Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District. Very quickly, or at high level, the EIFD has formed 5 basic steps. I mean, the city and whatever other taxing entity or group wants to contribute a portion of their share of property tax revenue has to adopt a resolution of intention. Secondly, there's, as I mentioned, you have to prepare and adopt an infrastructure financing plan, and then enter into tax sharing agreements where applicable with a county or any other special taxing entity district, with the exception of school districts, in terms of what that share of revenue might be. And then once the infrastructure financing plan is approved and formed, the EIFD is formed, and the Public Financing Authority then moves forward and implements the plan. So with EIFDs, the amount of revenue that's actually generated in the early years, I would say the first 5 to 10 years, is quite little, because over time, as development occurs, your assessed value increases, and then the portion of revenue that's generated in terms of property tax would then be used to finance the infrastructure projects that are listed in your plan. So what we like to do at Cosmont is look at other diverse funding approaches and sources of revenue that you could leverage with your Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District monies, which are essentially property tax. So in the case of state financing sources, it's going after cap and trade proceeds, because that achieves the state's goals of transit-oriented development. Or it's federal and state grants, you're reducing greenhouse gases, or other funding sources like user fees or hotel bed tax or benefit assessments. All of these could be used in those early years to fund a lot of the administration of your Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District, and making sure that when the money ramps up in terms of assessed value and you get increase in property tax revenues, you can then offset what you've been using, at least in those early years, to finance the projects that have been approved by the city. So I'm going to go through just high level the 2 areas that we've identified, at least initially, with the city. One is the downtown EIFD project area. As I mentioned earlier, it's 320 acres. And the projects are listed on the top right hand of the map, the top 7 projects that at least have been identified at the outset that could potentially benefit from infrastructure monies that are provided as part of, or generated, I should say, as part of the district. The second area is the BKK landfill site and areas adjacent. And the projects as well are listed from 8 to 12 in the right-hand corner. Some of those are public projects. Others are projects that could actually increase the property tax base as far as assessed values are concerned. Some of the key initial observations that we found just through going through our analysis: one, development in and around the downtown and BKK site are really going to be the drivers for increasing assessed value and funding those infrastructure improvements with those revenues that are generated as a result of development. The primary goals of district formation, as I mentioned, are really to try to maximize the revenue streams to support infrastructure for any future development that's proposed in either of these areas, and also to leverage your ability to get a low base year assessed value. And so what I mean by that is essentially the idea with an Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District is to get a low base year assessed value. So with these 2 areas, whatever the current assessed value today is, the idea is to establish an EIFD, put your flag in the ground, and as development ramps up, as projects get completed, assessed value grows, and the revenue as a result of that growth in assessed value could be used to provide infrastructure and support projects that I mentioned earlier in the presentation, whether it's public facilities, brownfields remediation, industrial structures, affordable housing, so on and so forth. And the other major observation is really that, our recommendation, at least in the outset, is that West Covina consider at least having initial conversations to partner with the Los Angeles County and other potential affected taxing entities to maximize the amount of property tax that could be leveraged to provide funding for these infrastructure improvements that are identified. Now, part of that is really kind of interesting, because in LA County in particular, there are only 17 out of 88 cities that really qualify based on the county's adopted ordinance to participate in an EIFD with the county itself. So in the event that, West Covina is one of those 17, so in the event that the council or city decides to move forward with exploring further options as it pertains to the EIFD formation and whether or not the county would be willing to participate, we're already at a strategic advantage, I would say, in terms of trying to start having those conversations. This slide really just represents a lot of what we've talked about today. The box starting on the top left-hand corner really kind of estimates the existing assessed value in both areas, which is almost $900 million. And talks a little bit about the acreage we're talking about, 980 total acres. and just makes the point or reemphasizes the point that it's really critical to prioritize some of the proposed and potential projects that the city and/or another special district that wants to be a part of an EIFD would have in terms of infrastructure projects they'd like to accomplish. The bottom left-hand corner really outlines some of the infrastructure needs that are already identified, at least preliminarily, in terms of street improvements, water, pedestrian, open space landscaping, city uses, as well as mitigation measures potentially for BKK. Desired uses on the top right-hand corner really relate to retail, residential, office, recreational, hotel. Any uses that would support an increase in assessed value are really being explored at this point. And then potential partners, at least at the outset, that would make sense for the county, or county would be one. I think primarily that the city would likely entertain having initial discussions with to talk about establishing an EIFD. As you see here, the table before you splits up the priority infrastructure projects in the downtown and BKK area. The downtown totals just over 100 million. The range is about 101 to 111 based on initial estimates. The BKK site is around 12 million, rounded up to about 12 million in terms of infrastructure improvements. This list really represents the types of infrastructure improvements that the statute allows the city to fund and finance. So what will be required as part of the infrastructure financing plan that I mentioned earlier is that the city hone in on the specific projects that they're willing to finance as part of the district from monies that are generated from the district itself, and focus those monies into making sure those projects get accomplished. So financing and funding, let's talk a little bit about that. So as you'll notice by looking at some of the maps from our analysis, the former redevelopment agency areas overlap pretty significantly the two areas that are being proposed this evening. Now, the statute that allows you to establish an EIFD really says that any debts of the former redevelopment agency are senior to any debts or infrastructure projects and financing priorities of your enhanced infrastructure financing district. In the case of the former redevelopment agency, outstanding debt in terms of bonds and other outstanding debts would need to get paid first. However, as it stands right now, historically, the revenues that are generated today have been enough to pay down those debt obligations. So, as I mentioned earlier, if you established today an assessed value, whatever that current assessed value is today for both of these areas, any increase in that assessed value should likely, theoretically, based on historic performance of being able to pay down old redevelopment debt, should go directly to the district to fund these infrastructure financing improvements that I've outlined in the table in the previous slide. This is the estimate of net available revenues for both of these areas. So what we did is tried to break it down into two separate areas, two scenarios. The first scenario being that the city contributes 100% of their share, which is 18 cents on the dollar. So 18 cents of every dollar goes to the city in property tax revenue. The scenario also contemplates the county contributing 50% of the city's share of tax increment. So what we found is when the county is running their analysis on whether or not they're willing to entertain an EIFD or at least contribute to an EIFD, it's either a 50% match or they're going in at 100%, which is scenario 2 with the city itself. So scenario 1, 18 cents comes directly from the city, and the county matches that at 9 cents, so half of the city's share. It's just an assumption. Nothing's been negotiated or discussed with the county, but this is how, at least preliminarily, we look at doing an analysis to see what revenue could be contributed. Scenario 2 assumes that the city and the county contribute the same amount. So the county matches the city's share, which is 18 cents. The table below really goes through the revenue streams at certain periods, so 10-year, 20-year, 30-year, and 45 years, which, as I mentioned earlier, is the length of time of the district that would be in operation. So as you can see, scenario 2 is really the higher of the two because the county is contributing more money theoretically as part of that process. As far as startup funding sources are concerned, startup capital is obviously an important component of EIFD formation. Other complementary funding sources that we've outlined here, like grant funding, city, county, special district loans, using Measure R, SB1, transportation gas tax revenues, or additional revenues should be explored, and we recommend that they do, that the city does explore those in order to look at the best way to partner up with, whether it be a development impact fee based on a development itself, or working with a special district or county to see how much revenue they would want to contribute, and seeing what the best match is in order to pair those funds together to finance the priority infrastructure projects. So I'm going to talk a little bit about implementation, and then I'll open it up for questions. Some of the key, very high-level considerations for implementation. CEQA is one. Legislation says that with the infrastructure financing plan, any required CEQA documentation for those proposed infrastructure projects needs to be completed. So you're subject to CEQA. Funding capacity is also very important, making sure you have effective partnerships with either the county or other special districts to leverage monies like grant funding is key. The timing for adoption, you have until December 1st to file, and I'll go through a more robust timeline in the next slide. And then your former redevelopment project areas. In the event that anything changes with the amount of debts that the former redevelopment agency, now successor agency, has on its payment schedule, its debt payment schedule, that will affect the amount of revenues that are available for your enhanced infrastructure financing district. So here's the timeline. It starts really with 1 and 2, and that's kind of what we've been through thus far, the preliminary analysis, including a tax increment analysis. We're recommending continuing with the process, but not only continuing with the analysis to refine it as needed, but to conduct public outreach with whether it be landowners in your proposed districts or potential members of your public financing authority, like the county or other special district, members of the public, so on and so forth. And then going through and determining what your final boundaries are going to be for your enhanced infrastructure financing district, and then adopting the necessary resolutions, putting together your infrastructure financing plan, and making sure that that goes through the necessary challenge period, and then filing with the State Board of Equalization to make sure your boundary areas are put into place, and the county can start distributing tax increment the following fiscal year. So assuming our target date of next year of June, if we were to get all that done, 1, 2, and 3 on this list, then we would shoot for December 1 of 2018 to formally adopt, and we wouldn't get revenues until the following fiscal year, which would be July of the 2019. So that's really it. I know it was a lot of information, so I'm happy to answer any questions and go through it in greater detail.
Mr. Mayor, if I can address a few other points real quick. The EIFDs, as Brian mentioned, it was a creation after the loss of redevelopment or the elimination of redevelopment. There was controversy on redevelopment, whether it was beneficial to communities and whatnot, but I think most folks agree that the benefit of redevelopment was when it came to public infrastructure projects that were completed with using tax increment dollars. So this is a substitute for the elimination of redevelopment when it comes to public infrastructure. Brian, can you bring up slides 20 first, the EIFD project area map for the downtown?
Yeah.
Just so we can go in a little bit more detail for the benefit of the community there. Is that there? Yeah.
Yeah.
So when Brian lists Porto's Bakery, the assisted housing facility, transit center, Greenway Network, West Covina Mall, Meritage Homes, school district sites, these aren't necessarily projects that are being funded by the EIFD. These are all things in the upcoming future that could have an impact. So for example, Porto's Bakery. There is no infrastructure improvements necessary for that to move forward, but what's the benefit of that is coming in is we would imagine that there'll be, if we establish the new baseline for the EIFD as soon as possible, when Porto's comes in, it will generate additional property taxes for that site, which starts to create that new tax increment that the city is looking to do. That is the same thing for the assisted housing facility that is moving forward on the corner of Sunset and West Covina Parkway. a project that could, if we need having matching funds pay for it, the transit center, either at the Plaza West Covina or along West Covina Parkway, which we've had discussions about a potential project. The Greenway Network is something that's been discussed as well, and having funding coming from the county, from the state, or potentially leveraging revenues in the EIFD to help fund that as well. The West Covina Mall, they are under, or I believe they're beginning a master plan to redesign the mall. They've told us they're working on it. We have not been a part of that process yet. But if they do move forward with a redesign of the entire plaza, that too hopefully will generate new property taxes as they bring in new businesses to that center. The same with Meritage Homes there, which is looking to build along Cameron Avenue and Toluca right there as well. And then the school district site is a site of interest. As Brian shared with you, these sites do not have to be touching one another. And so since that site currently generates no property tax because it's a school district site, if you build new homes there, which is being proposed by a developer as well as being considered by the school district, that would generate brand new property tax that could be used for this EIFD. The next slide on the BKK project. So up there it talks about number 8 is the commercial, retail, recreation. The City Council will get a presentation at your November 7th meeting from a developer, Singpoli, that's expressed an interest in developing up there. Right now there is no property tax being generated on the successor agency property. So if Singpoli as a private investor came in and made improvements, or in the future if any other developer came in and making improvements, that creates brand new property tax for that site, which could be utilized those funds. Number 9 is the Charles Company office buildings. There is no infrastructure improvements that the city is required or the successor agency as part of their project, but as they build too, if they do their office building, that will increase property taxes up there as well. Because right now it's a vacant lot, so there's minimal property tax that they're paying. On the AAA pad development, again, that's similar. Singpoli is finishing up their due diligence on that, which will create new property tax. Item number 11 is the trail system. The community and the city has expressed an interest to continue building that trail that connects Bigley Dreams to Gulfster Park along the ridge line up to the county trail system in Walnut. And funds could be generated from this project to help leverage and pay for that as well as the canine training facility that the city has expressed an interest in doing as well. So again, the intent of the EIFD is, of course, to try and find ways to leverage money, find new monies to do these infrastructure projects that the city has expressed an interest in doing. And that's one of the reasons why we've undertake this. I do apologize, I'm going to go back to slide number 20 real quick to make sure we are full disclosure. I think it's 20. The EIFD project area, I'm sorry, for the downtown. Oh. Downtown? Yeah. The downtown one? The reason I want to bring that up as well as one of the items that's being discussed is we're also adding Cortez Park to it. That has been identified as a location for a potential stormwater treatment project. And that we estimate could be up to $20 million. And so EIFD could help fund that as well as leverage other funds from other areas like where the county would help offset some of those costs that the city may incur. So that's the intent of establishing these EIFDs early, is so as the new tax increment comes in, the city council can start deciding if these projects are ones that they would like to see funded using these projects and leveraging it with the new monies that are created as well as existing revenues that we already have. But I want to make sure I highlight what Brian said. An EIFD does not mean that we're increasing property taxes. The property tax formulas stay the same. All it says is that new property taxes that are generated allow the city to leverage that and negotiate with the county and other ability or other agencies to try and offset our costs for infrastructure projects moving forward. With that, I'm sure both Brian and I can answer as many questions that you and the public have.
Are there any questions of staff? Yes. Mayor Pro Tem Spence.
Yeah, I have some questions on this, and I know I think didn't the governor just sign the bill that allows it to be used for affordable housing and stuff too, right? From the original purpose. I have a question on the vote for if there's a bond using these revenues, you know, the 55% threshold. And my question is, when it says registered voters, it's just the registered voters within the EIFD, or is it the entire city?
The EIFD. So the threshold
So
is
if-
12.
Yes, so the threshold is, what do you mean?
12 registered voters.
So, for example, if we did the downtown area, it would just be the colonies that would be voting.
Yeah, it'd be by landowner.
It'd be by landowner, or it'd
So
be
the
registered voter?
threshold is 12 registered voters.
Yeah, so
If
they're
it's
probably-
less than 12, then it goes to the vote of the landowners.
Okay.
If it's more than 12, then it's a vote
Yeah,
of,
there's probably more than 12 in the colonies, maybe, who knows? But if not, then it's
Yeah.
just landowners, and BKK, obviously, there's nobody that lives at that site, so that would be landowners then, and there's only a few of them, including government entities. So like, does the city get to cast their vote on behalf of the EIFDs? So like in the
Yes.
BKK one, that's close to 55%, or is it over
Correct.
55% already?
correct. But think about it like this, if, you're probably not going to issue a bond for like 10 years, probably, because you need the increment to ramp up. So depending on what's developed there, there
Well,
could be registered.
I'm not sure I trust the city council on stuff like that, but anyways, but that's a whole different issue. And then, when we talk about the property tax, and something that you brought up was actually kind of interesting, because obviously there's some things that won't generate property tax increment, like the canine park, if that's a government thing, right? The trailway won't generate by itself any property tax increment, the one that goes clear through, or Cortez Park, because those are government entities. And then there's some entities like Portals is coming whether we do this or not, right? So there's that property tax increment we would get anyways. And if we don't do any AEIFD, we can spend that property increment any way we want. Is that correct? Like, we could spend it instead on infrastructure, we could spend it on police or fire.
Correct.
Or we could spend it on infrastructure in another part of the city that's not part of an EIFD.
You could, right, you could, that's exactly right. I think
Same
the
with the Vincent, that'd be the same for like the Vincent Center. When I look at the downtown projects, the assisted living thing, those are all approved things already, right? Staff, right? I mean, those are already approved, the assisted living. When I look at the list there, the assisted living's already approved, right?
Correct.
I mean, the Vincent Children's Center thing isn't approved yet, but, we know kind of what that's coming. And so, so I guess that's one of the questions that I have in this, is that I almost think that we're doing it in a process that what we should do is look at the infrastructure needs of the entire city and see how we're going to fund that over time, rather than just pick some districts. I guess, it's not a question for you. It's kind of a policy thing from the council. This is just geared towards infrastructure in certain places using increments that some of them we're going to get anyways, and some that won't come to us because we're improving things that are government stuff, so there's no increment there. And we're not prioritizing, nor have we had a discussion of the infrastructure needs in the entire city, in other parts of the city. And so I kind of think this process is a little backwards, that we should have that discussion about infrastructure in the totality of our budgets, and then figure out how we're going to fund it. And, I'm for having a policy where we put infrastructure in place, a percentage, whatever it is, so that we do fund infrastructure and we don't neglect it. But we should have the discussion about the entire city's priorities before we have just the IFD discussion. At least that's one of my opinions that I'd like to express, that I do think, we talked about prioritizing the projects in the zone. We should prioritize the projects in the city first, and then figure out if that's what we want to do and how we're going to fund it.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think the other thing to keep in mind is that these areas don't need to be contiguous. So if you have other areas of the city that are deficient in infrastructure and have needs, then those should be included and considered as part of the overall EIFD.
Yeah, and I'm not aware of that we've done that. I don't remember a discussion at the council talking about all our infrastructure needs.
The other thing to keep in mind, I'm sorry to
Chris, have we
interrupt.
had that, Chris? I mean, I can't remember when we've done that.
No, we haven't done a citywide, but that was part of this initial discussion, is to find areas that can help fund it, because there is a criteria that has to be met.
For EIFDs.
For EIFDs,
Right.
correct. And so that's the way is trying to find ways to find a creative solution to leverage our existing monies and try and get additional monies to offset our costs for these infrastructure projects.
The other thing to keep in mind is that the projects themselves that you want to fund through your EIFD are the most catalytic. They're the ones that are going to have the biggest impact in terms of economic development and inducing private investment. So that's part of the reason downtown was included.
Well, I understand that part from downtown, I can see that, but I have a hard time believing, as much as I'd like to see a canine park, that's going to generate a lot of economic revenue and development, or even the bike path stuff. I mean, I just, question how that would be generating tons of economic development.
Councilman
But
Toma.
I have more questions too. But
Let
anyways,
him,
okay.
Go back.
Sure.
Yeah, so on that point, what were the criteria for EIFTs? And then to follow up on that, I mean, the difference is, so I'm not sure if the question was, are we exploring other areas for EIFTs, not just these two? I mean, the differences with the EIFT, then you could leverage, and I haven't decided on either of these, but you could leverage the other entities' tax monies too. You can't just sort of, if you just do see what your own city's infrastructure needs, if they don't qualify for an EIFD, that's just your money. That's not leveraging the other entities' money too. That's the whole purpose of these EIFD districts, right? Understanding that that's an issue. And then I do know at least that the downtown plan is connected to, I mean, we had 2 years, I shouldn't say downtown plan, this downtown proposal, whatever, that includes the downtown district. I mean, that is connected to the 2.5-year process that we had with respect to the general plan. And we asked for input from a lot of residents. They said that's where they want the growth to take place. And it doesn't make any sense to do an EIFD in a place where no growth is going to take place, because that's where you get the benefits, is the increment, the tax increment. So you can pick some place where you have a big infrastructure need, but if there's going to be no growth there, you're not going to benefit from it, because it doesn't make any sense to set up an EIFD there, because people want that as their single-family homes with no big changes there, and that's what we decided through the downtown plan. So I understand in general sense, how we got here, but it would be good to explain explicitly, because the public may not have been in on that process, as to what the criteria is for the EIFDs and these particular ones.
So the statute outlines, as I'll go to that slide actually, because that's a good visual. They specifically call out these types of projects in the statute. Now, they also include projects of community-wide significance, which isn't as defined in the law. But what I will say is that the projects that, let's just say, for instance, the county wants to chip in a share of their property tax, there may be specific regional projects that the county's interested in that they want to see funded as part of this enhanced infrastructure financing district. So they'll be willing to chip in 9 cents of their 50 cents or 18 cents to match the city, but there could be a competing interest. So what we at least try to tell our clients when we're talking about EIFDs is find the projects that have the biggest bang for their buck, but also have regional significance. And that way, you can get other entities on board with this process. Because the whole point, and you raised the issue, it's being able to leverage those funding sources to be able to accomplish a lot of what you're trying to do, but also projects that are of mutual benefit.
Mayor Pro Tem Smith.
Yeah. And actually, some of what James says is correct, but I do want to correct something about the general plan, is that there is an impact to single-family homes. And they're just in that downtown plan where you can build 3-story townhomes right next to single-family homes within 10 feet. To me, that's an impact. And the Greenway program, we're going to open up people's backyards and don't have a plan to secure it, that impacts those single-family homes. So there is an impact. The unfortunate part is they're going to be jammed into some voting district and not be able to get at everybody that voted for that. That's going to be the sad part. But I don't think we need to pretend that somehow we're protecting single-family homes in those EFID districts, because we're not, or those next to them. They're the ones that are going to bear the brunt of it. But anyways, so I still think we have to have a discussion about prioritizing all our infrastructure in the city, and how would we go about doing that if we were to decide to do that before we decided if EIFDs could fund it, or even the possibility of including that in EFIDs.
Well, I think you could do those simultaneously, because you could start analyzing what the overall city needs are and how they would fit in certain districts. One of the things I do want to touch on is in attachment 1 of the report, there's criteria also from LA County. Brian touched upon it, that the K-9 facility, the trails, and other items like that are being put into the Greenway network because the county has an interest to see those projects done too. And that way, by having those projects in there, they're more likely to provide funding for the entire EIFT. Okay?
I understand that part of it.
Yeah.
But I also have the question then of, are we subsidizing the county's projects? Or, in the net? I mean, have these things been priced out? I mean, are we funding something that the county wants that generates absolutely no economic development, with our tax increment as well? I mean, how is that working out? Have we done those kind of numbers? Because when I read words like, say, sustainability, I'm not sure what we're funding. Some of it I understand. I don't know what we're funding on the homeless stuff. It says it's all about the county priorities. And so when we lock our property tax increment into that, what are we locking it into? I guess that's a question I have.
No, it's a great question. I think, from our standpoint, I think we've done the analysis to show, hey, listen, hypothetically speaking, if the county were willing to chip in half of their share, this is what that would look like in terms of revenues versus them matching the city. This is what they would look like. The next indicated step is really to start having those discussions with the county. Say, here, we've run the numbers. These are the types of projects we're looking to fund. These are the ones we think might be mutually beneficial to accomplish. This is how much those are. It's starting to have those discussions, and that takes time. I mean, you can just see just from the formation timeline that if we shoot for June of next year, we could close it in December, provided that, those discussions go well. But in the case of Laverne, just an example of one of our clients who will likely be the first in LA County to adopt an EIFD, tonight is their council meeting to ratify the infrastructure financing plan. So provided that the council approves it, it's going to the State Board of Equalization to really finalize the process. They'll start getting increment next year. But in the case of Laverne, this is before the county ordinance came out that basically adopted a policy that you had to make 15 cents or more as a city in order to even be considered, which West Covina is above that. But the point is, Laverne felt it was beneficial to them to lock in a low base year assessed value in and around their proposed gold line in order to get that set. And then they'll go back and amend their EIFD later and start having discussions with the county to say, listen, these are the types of projects we want to fund. How much are you guys willing to chip in as far as property tax revenue is concerned? How can we make this mutually beneficial to get a portion of your tax increment revenue? But they've decided, at least initially, for them to go alone. I mean, they're at 20 cents approximately on the dollar, and West Covina is at about 18. So they'll be wrapping up their process, hopefully this evening, if the council approves it.
Then how does that work on amending the EIFD? How flexible is it? I mean, and how flexible is it after the public votes, for example, if we did a bond on it, saying we're going to do some projects? I mean, can we just change that then? And
No, well, I think...
how does that work, I guess, through this whole long process, because our needs may change.
Right. It gets a lot trickier when you're talking about a bond. I mean, there's no public vote to form the EIFD, but if you're going out to a bond, the projects that are set in place, the revenue streams that you've projected have to be dealt with, in terms of addressing them, make sure the numbers are in a good place, because you're talking about rating agencies, you're talking about substantiating the pledge of revenues. So that all has to be figured out prior to issuing that bond. You need to make sure that that revenue stream is sound.
I understand that part, but also, can we change it after the public's voted for something? Where we've said, okay, we're going to do, well, that's what I'm asking. This
You
kind of
can.
bond. That we're going to do this, with the money if it's authorized, but then when something happens, we're able to renegotiate a different rate and stuff, we can spend that money on whatever we want, or how does it work?
Yes. You'd have to go through, the Public Financing Authority is the board that you'd have to go to amend your plan, basically. Because
So we can't.
Because they're estimates. I mean, you put in maximum amounts that you're anticipating, but those projects, those amounts can change over time.
Okay, thank you.
Tom.
Warshaw. Councilman Spence, or Mayor Pro Tem Spence raised some questions. You raised the example of what Laverne. I'm just curious if you could just flesh that out a little bit, because
Sure.
You said there's only 17 cities that qualify under the county, LA counties. There's their minimum 15% requirement. So did you say they're the first city to pass
They're, as
NEID?
far as I understand it, they're the farthest along. So tonight, their plan, their infrastructure financing plan gets ratified, and then they'll submit all their paperwork to the State Board of Equalization, and they'll change the tax rates and do that, start that process.
So I have I think 3 questions. The first is, can you just explain what they're using their EIFD for? The second thing is, I know there were these dates, these deadlines, and is the only reason for those deadlines this idea of locking in a low baseline, or was there something else that I missed in terms of, the December 1st and so forth to go by June? I mean, I understand you want a baseline that is before, for example, the downtown plan, right? We're hoping to bring, developers will come in, build stuff, increase the tax value over there.
Yeah.
So is that the only reason for a deadline or a timeline? And then the third question is, I heard you say that, you want some years to go by first before you actually take on something, because you need to see and make sure that you can actually fund that project, whatever that is. So I'm not sure I understood why there's this need to then try and partner up with other taxing entities if you kind of have to sort of see what your revenues are before you can even figure out whether something can be funded. So I guess there was a misalignment that seems like a contradiction. So those are, I think, 3 questions that I have.
So I'll start with your last question. So with respect to funding those projects, my point was to say that since you're getting a low base year value, for instance, let's use BKK for an example, there's really not much assessed value attributed to that land. However, over time, that area will likely get developed, or hopefully get developed, and will increase your assessed value. That's going to take some time. So my point was that you won't have as much revenue. It's like redevelopment. So back in the day, when you establish a redevelopment project area, your base value was very low. You needed to get funding either from the city or from other funding sources to kickstart your redevelopment project area. Just like in EIFD, it's the same thing. You need revenue, or you can leverage revenue from the county. The county's willing to contribute money, at least initially. Over time, that value will grow, and you'll be able to, likely, in 10 years or so, just depending on how quickly development occurs, that's how much revenue you'll likely receive as a result. Does that make sense?
So that point makes sense, but it seems to be a contradiction with this idea that we have to, that we have to combine in and get together with the county and whatnot to figure out these projects. So it seems to me that you need to start getting some funding and some revenue before you can even think seriously about a project that you might want to do. So I thought I saw in your deadlines and for the things that you need to start speaking to these other entities like LA County and whatnot. I didn't understand how that works when you don't know what your revenues and the development hasn't started coming in yet.
So we're backing into December 1st because that's the State Board of Equalization's deadline. So everything that precedes that is just our estimate of how long we expect things to take, because we've been through it and we're going through it right now. So given the target date of June was just an estimate of when we think you need to at least be at the point where you've started to have these discussions about projects and about the amount of revenue that the county may be willing to chip in, because you're ultimately getting to December 1st as your State Board of Equalization deadline date.
After that date, you cannot do what?
So that's their deadline. So if you want to capture, like in the case of Laverne, just put 2017 on these dates instead of 2018. So when they finish adopting their plan, which is number 10 on the list, number 11, they're going to file with the State Board of Equalization. And so what that effectively means is the time it takes for the State Board to process everything means that July of next year, they'll start receiving tax increment. If you don't make that December date, you just wait to the next fiscal year. So the objective is to, sooner rather than later, to capture the value that it is today.
I see. So that's a fiscal year deadline. It's not like these things evaporate for good. It's just then you have to wait for another cycle of a tax increment. Okay.
Yeah, sorry for not clarifying that.
The last thing was, can you give an example of what Laverne is actually doing with their EIFD?
So their funding, their EIFD includes the University of Laverne, the proposed Gold Line Station, the LA County Fairplex. So all the infrastructure, they're really transit-oriented development projects that are going to be funded that will lead to mixed-use projects, TOD projects along that station. So they're trying to fund those types of improvements.
How is the University of Laverne, is that for profit? No, it's a nonprofit, isn't it? So how is that, what is property tax increment are they giving up, or are they part of that?
So they're not.
Yeah,
They're not.
but they're getting infrastructure improvements.
They're getting the benefit. That's very true. They're a partner. They're a landowner. So they vote. They'll vote on any future bond issue. So they're a member, of the district. But yeah, it gets complicated when the district itself is not contributing.
So with the EIFD, there's really no reason to do an EIFD unless you can get another taxing agency, because we could just do it on our own. Is that correct?
You could. The only benefit of doing it and going it alone, which is effectively what Laverne is doing, is because they know down the road EIFDs can help leverage grant funding opportunities for transit-oriented development, for cap and trade. They receive higher eligibility, I would say, than not doing it to get those to get those grant funds for infrastructure projects. If the county comes along later, they found that the money that's generated is enough to start funding some things, but ideally the whole purpose of doing it is to, one, establish a low base year so that you can capture that revenue as time goes and development happens, and two, really making sure you can leverage other funding sources. EIFDs are a perfect example of trying to achieve the state's aims and get that grant funding money based on trying to fund transit-oriented development, greenhouse gas reduction, vehicle miles traveled, reducing that, so on and so forth. So that's really, this unlocks, an EIFD really unlocks your eligibility for a lot of other grant funding sources that you wouldn't otherwise be eligible for.
Thank you. Go ahead. Councilman Tone.
So I've seen that in the statement here in the report too. Why is that about the leveraging the funds? Is there something like categorically EIFDs are given priority, or is it because the kinds of things that the EIFDs will build are the kinds of things that get granted? But then why do you need an EIFD to accomplish that if you're going to sort of try and create some sort of infrastructure project? What's the difference between whether you do it as an EIFD or whether you just say, we have this infrastructure project and we need a grant for it? I don't understand that difference, because I've heard this comment about leveraging the EIFDs all the time, but I don't know what that means in terms of how that actually, why that makes a difference.
So it's twofold. I think it's both the things you mentioned, one of which is the types of projects that you see listed that we talked about today are really the same types of projects that they're looking to fund with those grant dollars. So this is a concerted effort of the city, given that the state's granted us the authority to establish these districts, to help finance some of these improvements. So if you get different scoring, right, for transit-oriented development projects or for projects that are improving, energy efficiency or so on and so forth. So what this really does is it elevates your eligibility for those funding sources. You're already putting in and establishing, because the other thing is when we talk about leveraging other people's resources, it's not just that. It's about regional projects. So if you're a community that has a regional project, whether it's transit related or not, and you have the county coming on board to help finance a part of that, and you're also achieving whatever the state's checklist is in terms of sustainability and transit-oriented development and trying to reduce greenhouse gases, you rise, I would say, as far as the top of the list in terms of getting those grant dollars, because you're really taking a step forward more so than others, a concerted effort to really kind of establish your district and say, these are the projects that we prioritize that we want to fund, and these match pretty well with your grant funding requirements.
Are there any other questions? If not, do we have anyone from the public that would like to speak? Please turn in your yellow card.
The first card we had was Mr. Seiton. Other folks here wish to speak. If you could please state your name at the podium and limit your comments to under the 5 minutes, that would be wonderful.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council, city staff, members of the audience. I'm Frederick Sykes, 40-year resident of West Covina. I am hesitant to wholeheartedly support the go alone by ourselves on this $12 million Glendora project. But however, when I look at the when I look at the K-9 project, I definitely support that, because when I look back over the years, I can recall that we've had about 1.5 million from Congress. Hilda Solis brought $500,000 for our communication system in the past, and then we had Congresswoman Chu, who brought a substantial amount of money for our intersection at Azusa and Amar Road, that infrastructure. So this brings to mind how enthusiastic Congresswoman Napolitano is about the K-9 project. I don't know if you remember when Chief, the former chief was here, Faulkner. She expressed, and she enthusiastically expressed that she wanted to support and get a project going. So I definitely wholeheartedly support that when you have the county that says they'll chip in. So those are the kind of things I'm hoping that we will really push hard for. Like again, I want to reiterate when we do these standalone projects where we have such deep debt already that we're paying, I would prefer that if we could, even if it's the Glendora project, if we can get someone to help us out, then I don't mind going into that. But going forward, gentlemen, please, if you can get those supports and leverage those enthusiastic ideas that they want to contribute, because it's a regional, and that's the way they looked at the K-9 project, was that it had a regional effect and use. So that's about it. Just thinking about the debt. Hopefully we can come up with some projects to work on the debt. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jim Grivich.
Tonight I get to speak to you in a different role than I have in the past. I actually spent my professional career as a budget analyst, last 10 years as a consultant in bankrupt community colleges. And when I was asked to analyze why these districts went bankrupt, the answer was kind of simple. They ended up spending money on things that didn't generate revenue. Essentially, what I want to talk about is this is really a budget question on how you want to spend your money. If you take the property tax money out of your regular city revenue, which is what this would do, and say it has to be spent on the list of projects you have up there, that means it's not available for your regular budget. This council has said repeatedly over and over again that they think public safety is their highest priority. None of those things had anything to do with public safety. So what you're doing is taking money out of public safety and putting it in those things instead. The main issue that you will have with this, it won't happen immediately, it won't happen right away. As he said, there isn't a whole lot of money involved the first year, but over time, a huge amount of money is involved. He put on his chart that $2.5 million of city revenue in year 10 will be devoted to these projects instead of your regular budget. If you want to talk about police officers, that's give or take 15 officers. Exact numbers are a little rough, but 10, yeah, that's right. They'll make $250,000 each instead of whatever. The point I'm trying to make is this is really a priority decision. Councilman Spence kind of mentioned that. I want to emphasize that, most of the city isn't real excited about that list. Most of the residents of the city I'm talking about. What they're excited about is being safe. They like their fire department, they like their police department. And I don't think it's a service to the residents of the city to take money away from safety and put it in basically projects that nobody thinks, I shouldn't say nobody, that's not the right word. The majority of the residents don't think is important. And I hope you understand that I want to speak specifically to the bikeway for a moment. You've heard me talk about that before. It, I think, has the potential to de-develop the city, because if it in fact becomes a homeless encampment, like you will end up with a city that is going down, like Santa Ana is right now. If you read today's Tribune article, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Santa Ana is going down because of homeless encampments along the river. And I just hope you understand that you want to develop the city. You want it to be better, and for it to be better, it has to be safe.
Thank you. Our next speaker is John Shoemaker.
I have more, I guess it'd be questions about it, like BKK. You know, I've thrown some numbers out about that if they put in $500 million, how much money the city would actually get. Well, is that $1 million get stuck in this area and it can't be used anywhere else in the city because it's that incremental tax revenue? Because part of that development, the idea was, look at all the police it's going to buy us. Look at all the fire it's going to buy us. Look at all the infrastructure that we're going to get throughout the city. But if that incremental tax revenue is stuck there, how is that helping police and fire and all these other things? That's one of the things that, I'd like to have answered. One of the slides said something about $12 million worth of infrastructure was needed at BKK. Is that before or after the, I think it was $4 or $5 million that Charles and Company was supposed to invest in infrastructure up there for that 1037 deal? Is that including or in addition to? Because it's one of the things that I think, is important. How much money is really needed up there and where's it going to come from? The other thing with this, all this structure going in, when does my street get fixed? When do the streets down on the south side get fixed? When do the streets all over the city get fixed? Because, I don't want to get into the thing. I remember previous councils always talking about, their kids saying, boy, you can sure tell when you go into West Covina because the streets are good. Well, the streets aren't getting repaired or at least slurried every election cycle so they can get reelected. They're kind of deteriorating at a rapid pace. So those are the types of things, if you can convince others to give up part of their tax money, great. But then again, are we solving the basic problems? I know that Santa Ana was mentioned. I understand they have this wonderful transit center down there that has 2 or 3 employees and it's empty. That was used by, hey, build it, they'll come. I just hope we don't start getting to that. I think they're thinking about starting to use it for as a homeless shelter now because nobody else is using it. Are we building things with enthusiasm and prayer and a hope instead of looking at things as what's actually going to happen and is there going to be any benefit? Build a transit center over here at the mall. How many cars does that bring into the city for people to get on the bus? How many more buses does that bring? And where do we widen the street to handle all this additional traffic? Oh, we don't. So it gets backed up even more. Let's look at some of the pros and cons of these things. I've said numerous occasions that the difference between business and government is government will say you can't do it, or they'll go to the extreme and everything under the sun can be done forever. Whereas business will look at it and say, this is what it's going to take to do it. I want my streets fixed. I want my parks maintained. And when I say that, I mean throughout the city, not just over here at Glendora, not just over at, and did you say there was going to be like a water treatment? Sewage water treatment at Cortez Park? Oh, stormwater. Oh, okay. Where does the stormwater come from? The sewer pipes, right? Oh, when it runs off? So it's nice and clean, and that's why we need to treat it, right? Okay, well, I guess the residents over there will want a nice storm drain water treatment plant built in their park. But that works out okay. So, let's stop and look at some of these things. It's getting kind of interesting. Bye.
Our next speaker is Jerry Patras.
Good evening. I'm very concerned. We've got past bonds we're paying off of. We've got projects that didn't go the way we wanted them in the past. I really want fire and police protection, and I think the city needs some flexibility in that. The previous speakers, Mr. Grivich and Mr. Shoemaker specifically, I share their sentiments. And Mayor Pro Tem Spence, your remarks really hit home with me on some of the things you said. One of my concerns, and I don't mean, it sounds negative and it probably is, it's not meant to be as negative, but we had budget games, that 6.1 deficit to inline budget still impacting my judgment. I would like to slow this down and your plan looking at the whole city and actually rationally prioritizing what we need. And if it means this is a good idea, which I'm kind of skeptical on, go the next cycle. Let's do things rationally, not expediently. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Chris Miller.
Chris Miller. I also, hold the sentiment of Mayor Pro Tem Mike Spence, Jerry Patras, John Shoemaker, and also Jim Grivich. But in addition, I have some questions. One is, the fact that all this money is being earmarked for development and developers. So one question I have is how can we vote consciously, being a developer or having, being friends with Charles Company or McIntyre? And secondly, this will erode away the protections of Prop 13 of 2/3 vote for bonds. Many of us had quite a surprise this year opening our property tax and seeing an increase, which equated for me to a 6% increase. Some, that was an $80 increase. Others, it was, 700 to over 1,000. With that being eroded, this is going to basically pay for projects, for different projects. And, if you go to bonds, now that can get passed quicker or easier. Rather than finding fees and taxes to help improve things, why don't we do things that, account for a 360 win and also help the environment? One thing to look at is making the city a microgrid. Allowing residents to put in solar panels, not to the amount they use, but actually what they can fit on the roof or structures or property that still looks, aesthetically pleasing, although most people don't like solar panels. They are making tiles now. But have the city put in infrastructure for battery system. And right now, use that battery system to sell back energy, buy energy at a lower rate, let's say during on-peak, and sell it during mid-peak. But guess what? The rates are shifting. On-peak is going to be 4 to 9. So when the sun's not producing, you can use that to basically fund different projects of the city. Rather than selling the energy at Edison's rate, you can even give it a discount to the residents that participate in this program. And then that way, it's a win-win for everyone, the city and the residents, and it's a revenue stream. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other speaker cards. Is there anyone else? Mr. Kennedy.
Just real quick, Mr. Mayor.
And just make sure you fill out a card afterward.
Real quick, I only have 2 questions to ask, and the first question is to the city manager. Now, you're talking about Cortez Park, so you're talking about saving storm drain, runoff water, or are you planning on building a tank, or a well, or what is your? Okay, and then my second question is that who drew this map downtown? How do you figure that Orange and Cameron is considered downtown? So if it wasn't even downtown when they incorporated in 1923, and that's where it incorporated. So if you do mixed use, so where Mike Spence's father lives there on Sawyer, you got 3 stories looking at everybody's backyard. I think that's something that seriously you need to think about. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak? Then I will close the public comment, and if we can get some of those questions answered.
Sure. I think a couple of the speakers discussed about, this being a beneficial to private developers. I think the Charles Company was mentioned. Charles Company has certain obligations they have as they move forward with their project. This EIFD is not designed or intended to give them any funds to do their commitment. That's not to excuse them from their financial commitment. So, for example, they have to do the water tank project up on their project. This is not intended to fund that project. They have that financial responsibility to do so already. With regards to other street projects, I know that we recently did a study of all the street paving projects through the community, and that the streets are being repaved based on that assessment. And so that's available on our city's website if you want to see where your street ranks on that program. With regards to discussion about the downtown district of the drawing, that was really drawn as part of the general plan. That's a land use issue. That's not part of the EIFD. So that was really something that was already designed as a base map here, because if you look at the drawing here, we've also included areas outside of the downtown district that we think that there's potential to generate additional tax increment, or there's that maybe future efforts to remove blight in the community. One of the things that was touched upon is the requirements from the county. The county, if you submit into the for an EIFD for their consideration of sharing, they want projects. Let me make sure I get this correct. Yeah. Well, it's actually on the attachment 1. It's item 2 under proposal standards. All EIFD proposals must demonstrate a regional and community significance in areas that may include job creation, affordable housing, blight removal, sustainability measures, or improvements to regional transportation. Those are the areas that they want to see that these projects are able to satisfy. I think the question is that Speaker brought up regarding Cortez Park. Now, council has not approved anything. That was just part of a study that was done. Is under new laws, the city is required to collect and treat water that comes from the sky that touches the ground here in the community called rainwater, that washes into areas, and treat it before it gets into the flood control system, not in the sewer system. Sewer system and flood control are completely different systems. So cities are being required to treat that water that comes from the sky before it goes in the flood control system in order so we're not polluting our oceans and beaches. And so I think that the price tag for the state of California to accommodate that is in the multi-billions of dollars. And so cities are looking at avenues to try and find ways to fund those projects. And to no surprise of, I'm sure, many of people, one of the pieces of legislation that the council opposed that was approved by the governor and the state legislature was to allow cities now to pass on those costs of those stormwater projects onto sewer bills without a vote of the public as well. Thank you for that correction as well. So those are what the state is now looking towards cities to start funding those projects for those type of projects in order to assure that the quality of the water that's coming from the sky, that touches our grounds, be treated before it gets into the flood control channels. So that was one of the areas, is that Cortez Park happens to be a large area that could serve a certain flood plain in that area. That's at a lower level. So there's areas throughout the community that we're looking to do projects. We're even looking to do a project in cooperation with Bassett Unified School District at Bassett High School, to where they're looking to do, I think it's a $45 or $50 million treatment project that West Covina gets credit for in order to maintain the quality of water that comes on the surface water. I think that it's, with regards to diverting funds from public safety, that's not, I know that is how, I guess, a ramification or decision, a policy decision of the city council, but in all actuality, boy, I had 5 minutes on me, really? Wow. Guess I'm going too long. I know. But there is a lack of infrastructure improvements and deferred maintenance on our facilities that we're seeing throughout the organization, whether it be here at City Hall, our fire stations, eventually the police station, city yard. All those facilities are going to need improvements eventually and to be replaced. Hopefully, Those will all be done in the next 45 years, which is the intent of these districts. And there's an opportunity here to try and leverage some of those money so it's not the full burden on the residents here within the community. This is just a mechanism to try and find creative ways to fund projects without having to go back out to the vote of the public and say, okay, let's increase your property taxes on your personal residential in order to fund these projects. Because that's what most cities do when they go to fund a brand new city hall or a brand new police station. They actually incur a parcel tax on your properties. This is a way to hopefully move around that in order to make these improvements. And again, it's a policy decision of the council. If they don't wish to move forward with these type of projects, or if they want to look at it but maybe scale down the public benefit projects that we do, that's completely up to the city council.
Mayor Pro Tem Spence.
Yeah, I do think, though, that it does increase the pressure to raise taxes for ongoing projects, too. If you take a bunch of it out to unlock it in, then it increases the pressure to say, oh, well, we can't fund these things unless you pass a utility tax or sales tax thing. But my question is, on all these projects that are listed, how many of them were in the list of projects that were targeted at the impact fees that were approved by a majority of the council when we raised them and established a bunch of impact fees, the ones close to like Pasadena's, highest in San Gabriel Valley? How many of these projects were on that list?
I don't know if I have that answer.
Because I'd be curious, because we identified those as things that were impacted by developers, and we're collecting fees to supposedly, I guess, fund them at some point or to fund some of those.
Partially fund them. They're not going to fully fund them.
Oh, I know
Yes.
that, but I'm just curious how many of those were not on that list?
I would imagine that there's going to be similarities between the two lists.
Yeah, maybe
I don't have that. I can get you that exact
show me
answer
the
if you'd like.
imaginary comparison at some point.
Okay.
Because I'd be curious about that.
Are there any other questions of staff? Councilman Wu.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think, a lot of residents always, worry about, well, the downtown project, and that will squeeze, we spend the money on the street improvement, because this is come from the budget from the street. It restricts the fund. So maybe you can answer, will it anyway will squeeze, the very important how to improve our street, because a lot of street, I think they need to be repayment. So maybe, well, and last time we're talking about how we do based on the survey from Chino to talk about all this improvement by the schedule. So maybe you can answer to give them a peace of mind, this is not going to squeeze or they will, so you need to give us a very clear answer for that. Second thing, regarding the Charles Company on BKK, because they hung on the property for a long time, and do we have any teeth for them to really improve on this, on the number, Charles Company number 9, he should build an office building. But it's a long time, they haven't done anything. And plus, we're going to have them to build the infrastructure about the water tank. And then so are they planning to do that? So we need to know from the developer, are they really need to improve, the infrastructure over there or not? I think this is currently my question for you.
Sure. So Charles Company has not been able to build their project for a couple of reasons. One is they don't own the property yet for the water tanks. They're required to build those water tanks as part of the development of their site. So until they own the property, they can't make any improvements on that property. It's still owned by the former successor agency. What the intent has been is we went to the oversight board. We have an exclusive negotiating agreement with Charles Company or M&A Gabay to move forward with the potential sale of that site. The oversight board asked for some additional due diligence to be done, which will be brought back to the council for approval. The intent is to have some sort of a purchase and sale agreement or development agreement, which would provide timelines of when they have to get that water tank project done, so that way it doesn't delay any future projects that the city may do on the remaining parcels up on top of the landfill. So that addresses the Charles Company. With regards to Glendora Avenue, the Glendora Avenue project itself that was recently approved by the City Council is not part of the funding mechanism of the EIFD. And so it is a separate project altogether. However, with regards to funding for street improvements or other things in the community, right now and historically for the last few years, because of the budget situation, we've only been investing in infrastructure funds that are transportation dollars. We haven't been using much general fund dollars. And what I mean by much, we may be using $500,000-$600,000, which is required under the new law to have a portion of what's called maintenance of efforts that cities have done in the past, to keep that portion of the general fund towards, a public infrastructure. So that way, the new monies that are coming in from the new Measure M and the new Senate Bill 1 funds, we're not supplanting what the city was already investing. And so it's supposed to be for new projects. So you'll see, for example, Measure M, SB 1, the city's going to be doing more repaving projects, new traffic signal projects, and those type of projects with those new funds to try and catch up on some of the deferred projects we haven't been able to do in the past.
Following question would be, I think that a lot of the time, the city council or the resident or city managers, we're trying to do is try to get improvement, try to get a business invest in our city, try to have they bring a big money so we can have a revenue to improve our public safety. So meaning we can get, hopefully, the new taxes coming $7 million, $10 million for so-called hotel, et cetera, on the 10 freeway, and all those nice development, hopefully we can get it. So this, I think this is all projection, and hopefully in the future, we really have somebody willing to spend the money. But I think the resident concern is this: for we to do, all this big, investment coming in, we might have to spend some money, like, one of the residents talking about, we squeeze $1 million or $2 million out of our general fund so we can hire more police. The idea is we try to get more business so we can create more revenue to create more public safety, so we can have a new maybe $10 million in the future budget, so we can hire 20, 30 police officers, increase our budget. But in the meantime, I think the worry from the resident is, will it become because we want to make money, we spend some money, will it squeeze our public safety fund?
Yes. No. No, I think that the concern is about, the discussion is whether or not there's going to be funds being diverted. Funds are not being diverted. It's not the current funds. We're talking about future funds. Right now, what the city is benefiting is, as new development happens in the city or as properties are reassessed, property tax goes up throughout the community. Property taxes are still our #1 revenue here in the community. What we're talking about is there's a portion of the community that, for example, the BKK landfill, that generate a very insignificant amount of property tax in the scope of things. We have the opportunity, as new development goes there, that where the property tax goes from 0 on the successor agency property to however, depending on how that future development goes. So this is an opportunity to capture those funds that are going to be new funds, hopefully leveraging it with new funds that the county would contribute, so that way we can take care of the infrastructure needs of our community. So if the concern is, let's say, for the downtown, which already has an significant existing property tax development, if the council is concerned about diverting those funds in the future, they can say, we're not going to do that district, but let's maybe do the EIFD for BKK, where in that part of town, as a new development comes in, those monies help to offset the infrastructure of the entire community. So there's the different ways that the city council can play this but you'll have less monies available for those infrastructure projects. But at least you'll have something that can help offset some of our future infrastructure needs of the community.
Mayor Pro Tem Spence.
Yeah, you, on the BKK property, because, I'm a little leery about this too. At one point, West Covina had the 4th largest redevelopment debt in the entire state, and so, and that didn't pay off for us in the end, did it, when everything got dissolved. And so I'm a little nervous, and it got to the point where we were doing projects out of our general fund. We were bonding general fund money, right? And we did that, or the city did that, none of us, but the city did that on our famous golf course, the West Covina Golf Course. How does the EIFD, if we do that with a property tax increment, we passed a policy or that we wanted to make those revenues go towards paying off that bond. How does that work with the EIFD if we're taking the property tax increment and putting it in the EIFD?
I'll defer to Kim and Brian if we need to, but bonds have been even protected in the redevelopment agency. So if the bonds have already been established, those will be protected. But also, if there's any kind of reimbursement agreements, that's where the challenge has been for cities, especially for us. So, we joke about it, but we would make sure that if any reimbursement agreements were to occur, they would happen at the start of the EIFD, which is kind of what the state has kind of taken the position on the redevelopment agencies, that reimbursement agreements that were not in effect within the first couple of years of the redevelopment agency, they're not even looking at those anymore. So we'd have to make sure that if the EIFD, to try and be in the best position we can to create those at that time, but I'll let the city attorney elaborate.
Yeah, with respect to reimbursement agreements like that, you really, it has to be established at the time. We want to make very clear how we're accounting for the expenses and so on, and there has to be a specific repayment schedule. And so that's how.
I apologize, because I don't think I said what I meant then is, we actually approve that, when we sell these properties at BKK, if we ever get to sell them, that money would be used to pay off the bonds that our general fund is paying. So how would that affect, does that affect, the EIFD affect that at all? Or
It shouldn't,
not?
because that's the sale of the purchase price of the property
So
and
it's
not
just
the property tax.
Okay.
Are there any other questions or comments? Do I have a recommendation? Well, I'll go ahead and start. I think setting up an EIFD for the entire downtown and BKK is too much. We know that costs to cities are increasing, will continue to increase, whether we like it or not. And to continue to take revenues from all of downtown that would be increasing, I think is too much. However, in looking at the BKK site where we aren't getting any revenues today, and we know that infrastructure will have to be done, and if it's a way to get grants and to get the county to help to fund some of that, I think that's the area that we ought to be looking at. And with that, I will make a motion to look at doing a BKK EIFD as recommended. Councilman Johnson.
I was really sitting thinking about this very seriously, and I do concur with you on the BKK. The situation I have, and I agree with a lot of the residents, if we start with these districts and these tax increments can only go for those certain things, public safety is a very serious thing for me. We all vowed when we took office that public safety is one of our #1 priorities. And I do believe that right now still, that we definitely should be looking at that and making sure that our priorities is with our public safety. So in that saying that, I'd be willing to second your motion on just with the BKK at this moment.
Is there any discussion? Mayor Pro Tem Spence.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from, but I still think the same issue applies, is that we should have this discussion in the total context of our budget and what we see is going to happen. And if that's really our priority as far as infrastructure, I really think we should have that conversation, not piecemeal it, where we approve something or start a process, in, what month is this, October, and then, we'll start another, we did something on Glendora downtown last meeting, so like every month we piecemeal all these different components that we all view as very important at the time we're focused on it, but we don't ever look at the whole picture of how these fit into our budget and our ongoing expenses and that kind of stuff. So I do think that would be, I would support this if that was part of this, that we would do it as part of the budget process in totality, but otherwise I can't support it.
Councilman Toma.
So a couple points. I get the potential value of these things. I guess the difference for me is that with the BKK site, we still haven't had any public comment in terms of where we're going forward with that. And so I don't see the need. I asked about the deadlines because I wanted to know, what situation. That's going to take, to the extent it gets developed, it's going to take years anyway. So without having had any hearing yet or any kind of town hall or any kind of discussion with the public about that, I think it's premature. And to the extent that, second, the thing is, I think people, care about public safety. The only public safety projects are going to happen, to the extent they're going to happen, are not going to be up there. They're going to be in the downtown area. And we had the police chief come a while ago saying, we all know we've had to do all these fixes in the police station since we've been elected. They've cost thousands of dollars, and there's only so many times you can patch a roof. There's only so many times you can do certain things. we're not going to put a police station up on BKK. That's just not the place for that kind of thing. It's going to happen somewhere in this downtown area. There's, talk about a need for a fire station. We have infrastructure issues, and this is a way of not taking away particular tax dollars that could be used for one thing, for another thing. It's, again, about, I won't say to use the term as a cliche, this leverage, but it is true. I mean, it is potentially getting new monies that the city won't have access to. So, and it's about getting certain things done that wouldn't exist otherwise. So it depends on how you look at it. I mean, if the money wasn't going to be there anyway, then you would never have access to it, and we aren't going to be able to use county money and other things for some of these infrastructure projects that we need. So, I mean, I think for those two reasons, one is I think it's premature on the BKK thing. I won't be voting for this at this time.
Councilman Wu.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We maybe don't have a police station, but we're going to the biggest K-9 station we ever have at the BKK. So I think, okay, we spent about $30 million bond on that project doing nothing. Okay, we owe $30 million, and we're paying $500,000 every year, okay, to pay for nothing for 20 years. So if you go over there to see, we just see a pile of dirt. Okay, and when the wind blow, all those dust, we're going to go down to all the residents. We need something over there. If we have infrastructures or road or something, we maybe can attract. If this simply doesn't work, we can maybe have somebody will work some other project. Okay, we need to have something to do over there to pay off this $30 million. Okay, and please to put a K-9 big facility over there so we can have something very nice, and for public safety, we can have 100 police officers over there from time to time with their K-9 training facility. So I think I will support, Mr. Mayor for his agenda to we maybe concentrate on BKK projects so we can move this. So hopefully we can get our debt paid, and we can have something, bring big amount of budget to our city. That's what we desperately need right now. Thank you.
If there is no other comment, go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, I apologize. To go to Mr. Spence's comments, if the council is changing the scope to be just the BKK project, the council will have to spend some time prioritizing projects throughout the city based on the fact that the BKK area will only generate X number of revenue over those 45 years. So it goes back to what Mr. Spence is asking for, which is evaluation of the priorities of infrastructure needs in the city as well. So that would be part of this too. What if this passes? You do.
With that, may I have a roll call vote, please?
I'll do it. Sure, why not? Did I say I was going to do it? Chris said he was going to. Okay, I'll do it. Yes, Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Spence.
No.
Councilmember Toma.
No.
Councilman Wu.
Aye.
Mayor Worsham.
Aye. Motion passes 3-2. And with that, I think we're adjourned.